Welcome, everyone. Welcome to, what day is it? The April 26th meeting of the Charter Commission. Tonight we'll be having our second meeting of April, and we'll kick it off with roll call. I was informed that Dick Smith is not going to be joining us tonight. He's still recovering from his surgery, so that's expected. So take it away, Janice.
Okay, Edward Traynor.
Here.
Chris Babbage.
It's been a while. Present. Thank you.
Janice Vance is present. Brenda Robinson.
Here.
Derwin Parkinson.
Here.
Susan Bloomfield.
Present.
Christian Babcock.
Here.
And Stephen Sayers.
Present.
And it looks like we have Heather tonight and Merton, but I don't see Natalie.
No, Natalie informed me last meeting that she would not be here tonight.
Okay.
So that was expected as well.
All right, and I know we have a guest tonight, so I'll let you take over from here.
Okay, yeah, and joining us tonight is Falmouth Town Manager Nathan Poor. Thanks for joining us, Nathan. He's also a resident of Kennebunkport and has also previously worked in the municipalities of Kennebunkport and Kennebunk. So he's come tonight to share his extensive knowledge of charter and town meeting, and also provide us with the opportunity to ask questions and comments. But before we get to that, we'll start with public comment. Any members of the public want to speak? All right, seeing none, we'll move on to Nathan, if you would mind taking the stand and introducing yourself, and feel free to.
One more time.
There you go. You were on already.
All right. Glad to be here. It's been a long time since I was in this room. I was hired in 1989 in Kennebunk as the assistant part-time planner. And I didn't know that I was going to get into this business. When I was in college, I was in a civil engineering program and started to not like it very much. Went to guidance and said, I'd like to get a business degree. And they said, well, you'd be better off by taking a few less classes and getting a public administration degree. And I said, whatever. I just want to get the degree, you know, and get out of here. I had no idea that I would actually get into this business. And it was really this town, this great town, that attracted me to the business. I started to talk to Rick Erb, who was the town manager at the time, and started to take graduate classes at USM to get my master's in public administration and public management. Started working with Durwood and others, and I worked here, I think, about 3 years, and I quit my full-time job as a management trainee in Hannaford to get the job in Arundel as their part-time planner, and then Brunswick is their part-time planner. So I was all over the place doing planning, and I really didn't know what I was doing. And I got really interested in Rick's job, and he mentored me somewhat. And I started applying for jobs and didn't get any until I did. And I became the town administrator in Freiburg. And I was the first administrator in Freiburg. They now have a town manager. In that form of government up there, town administrator, and at the time they called it administrative assistant, and it was really like a town manager, but with a whole lot less authority. So you would be able to hire people almost, and then bring them to the select board, where they would confirm that a hire of any employee, not just department heads. And that was a great experience for me. I was definitely looked at as someone from away. I was very young at the time, so there was a lot of challenges there. But I felt really good that their experiment in that management, and a few years later, I went to Raymond, but a few years later, Freiburg decided to go with town manager form of government. So I kind of felt good, like, okay, that worked, and maybe I contributed a little bit to that. Quick story in Freiburg. I'm going to get to charters in a second, I promise you. But it was my first budget meeting, and there were like 87 people on the budget committee, I think, and I called the meeting and sent out the notices, said we'll be meeting at 7 p.m. on that day of the week, and we'd be at town hall. And I had one woman, she was in her 80s, she went to town hall, and she got very ugly. She came to the town office a half hour later. we had a town hall that was a historic location, but where we worked in administration, it was the town office. So she put me in my place so that I started to learn the names of all those places in town. So I've worked in small towns, I've worked in medium-sized towns, and in Maine, I guess Falmouth and Kennebunk are considered larger towns, really, until you start getting into some of the cities. Kennebunkport was a great experience. I worked there for 6 years after I left Raymond. The Falmouth position became available, and you might remember at the time Barry Tibbetts and I were competing for the position, and it got down to Barry Tibbetts, and he and I were friends, so much so that our second interview was at the Woodlands Club in Falmouth, and you got to pick as a candidate appetizer, dinner, or dessert. And Barry must have got called first, and I felt like he was probably the shoo-in because he got dessert. He picked dessert. I'm like, you always want to be last. And so I got the dinner, and I fully expected we were going to have dinner. It would be casual. The minute we sat down, I had the fork up, and they started barraging me with interview questions. So I put the fork down, I slid the plate aside, and afterwards I got out to my car in the parking lot, and Barry and I were so close, I immediately called him, and I said, Barry, it's a real interview. Get ready. So, he and I talked a lot about that process. And so I've had experience in the town meeting towns, and I'll be honest with you, I miss it. It's nostalgic. But also in Falmouth, it is a very strong, what I would call strong town manager, town council form of government. There's no doubt about it. You look at it, it doesn't even require confirmation of department heads by the town council. It is completely relied upon by the town manager. The only positions that I don't appoint are the town attorney, trying to think if that's it, election workers. And that being said, with that power and authority, I also recognize that if I don't do a good job, I'm held accountable. So I'm constantly getting guidance from the council. If I don't do that and I start not doing a very good job, then, it's on me. And I guess I would suggest that you don't need to be concerned about a charter that's a strong town manager or a strong council charter, because the council still has the ultimate legislative authority to hire and fire the manager. I'm not saying, Heather, you're in trouble or anything here, but the thing is, we're accountable as town managers. And I do not take it lightly that the charter gives me a lot of authority. Some folks have said, well, you have that authority. Why do you bother asking the council? I'm like, because ultimately the council is the one that's going to report to the constituents and the residents. They're the ones that are getting the calls. And in Falmouth, I don't get a lot of calls. The constituents call the council. And I think that's the way it should be. I get some calls here and there. We don't get a lot of complaints in Falmouth. We have our certain fan club. I was actually looking to see if there were any followers here tonight, if they found out I was your guest speaker. When you're in a place for 17 years, you do develop certain good and bad fan clubs. But the charter in Falmouth, they were ahead of themselves, I think. It really has been fundamentally pretty similar since it was established in the 60s. I have been through 2 charter revisions now. I was through the charter revision in 2008. And in 2018, and we're already starting to talk about the Charter Revision Commission and process in 2028. What happens in Falmouth is I found that, I forget exactly what the structure is. I think the council gets to select 3 or 4, and then the rest are elected. But usually the folks that land on the Charter Commission are former councilors. It could be former board or committee members. It could be people at large. And they really, really try to go out and find a good balance in the community. We've had dissenting opinions in the charter process. Some changes that have happened. We ended up going to a regional assessing program where the Cumberland County provides assessing for Falmouth along with a half a dozen other communities, and has worked out very, very well for us. But it made more sense for the town manager to appoint the assessor in that case, and it used to be that the council appointed the assessor. So that was one change that they made back in 2018. Other things that have changed, when I first got there, any expenditure over $200,000 or any borrowing over $400,000, borrowing over $400,000 or expenditure required a referendum question at the June regular municipal election. there could be a citizen petition to override anything over 200,000. That obviously had to be increased. So in 2008, it went to, I think, something like $1 million and $2 million, and in 2018, it increased again. We also have a sewer department in town. I know you have a district here, and most common is a sewer district that has its own quasi-judicial, not quasi-judicial, but quasi-municipal governing structure. We have a department. It works great. I've always thought that if it doesn't work any longer, we've got Portland Water District right around the corner, but we are able to run that as an enterprise fund, and the town council serves, you might say, as district directors in that particular case. Trying to think of anything else. Other changes, recall. And I know your town has had some issues with that in the last couple of years. It used to be 10% of the last gubernatorial election, those that voted would have to sign the petition for a recall. They increased that to 20%. That's a lot. That's a big difference, right? That's double. So if you've got 10,000 voters that voted in your last election, that takes the recall petition from 1,000 to 2,000. So that's pretty significant. Other changes, really minor. As I was getting ready for tonight, I said, geez, I better read the charter. And I read it Tuesday. It was great. I enjoyed reading it again. And I made 4 or 5 notes. I'm like, I don't quite remember that piece. And I figured them out except for one, and couldn't quite get it. And so I called Amy Chow, our town attorney from Drummond Woodsum, and she called me right before I came over here. I said, don't worry about it if you can't get to it. I'll just tell him I don't know what it is. And she found out Durwood was on, and he said, well, he might ask. And so it's some really antiquated section that talks about if you have, all of a sudden you ran out of a quorum in your council meeting, right? Let's say there were 5 of you and you needed 4, and then 2 went off to go to the bathroom and didn't come back. How do you end the meeting, right? You don't have a quorum. So it's this really weird section that addresses that. And you wonder, why is that in a charter and not in, council rules or policy type of thing? So, yeah, I don't know if any of you have taken a look at our charter, if you have any specific questions.
Happy to open it up to questions from anyone who wants to lead. Go ahead, Ted, you had your hand up first.
Yes, thank you, Nathan. I was a member of the Kennebunkport Rotary Club when you were the manager down there, and I still am, and your loss was felt deeply by Kennebunkport.
Well, you've got a good one now. I have a lot of respect for
Yes,
Lori.
thank
Yep.
you.
Yep.
I'm looking at, if we look at the government, and there's the town manager part, the elected group part, whether it's the council or the select board, and then there's the people, the citizens of the town. So there's sort of three main groups, and then our principle of governance is a balance of power in some way. And so I was interested in your comment about that the manager over there has a lot of power, and you're aware of that, and that you were seeking voluntary guidance to make sure that, if I heard you right, in terms of making sure you didn't overstep or whatever, and that I'm wondering if there's other mechanisms that exist there that might ensure that, say, the citizen group has its role, or the citizens who are volunteering for the town, and the manager, and how, give us a little more of your experience on that.
Sure, there are some other opportunities for the residents to exercise their authority. I believe that it's only 10% of the last gubernatorial election registered voters is required to submit a petition for an ordinance amendment. So it's much more relaxed for the citizens to submit. As a matter of fact, there's one circulating right now. If you've been to Falmouth lately, there are a couple of buildings that stick out a little. One's a 4-story, one's a 5-story. It's right on Route 1. It changed the look of Route 1. Some people think it's great. Some people don't. And those that don't are signing the petition. And they're looking for the town council to change that provision, lower that height, make some difference. So, and they're nearly there. And I don't think that's been much of an effort. The other place that the council can intervene in operations, there is a section in there that allows the council to conduct an investigation into the affairs of the operations or any department. So let's say they felt like the manager wasn't doing what they needed to do with the management, let's say the police department. Police departments have been under scrutiny for, the last few years. And let's say they felt like the manager wasn't doing enough there. So they could conduct their own investigation. That's how they can insert themselves into that operational piece. Yep. And of course, the constituents can put the pressure on the council to do that. We still have public hearings on budgets. We just had one a couple of weeks ago. They have gone fairly well. We still have a budget validation referendum for our school budget, even though that law allowed towns to get out of it. I think it was 3 years after it started. Our town said, nope, we still want to do it. We have not had a budget fail yet on the school board. The citizens have a lot of access to our council. The council has something called Coffee with Counselors every month, where they set it up so that there's 2 of them, and it's by Zoom. So, of course, it's less than 3, so it's not technically a meeting, but the public's invited anyway, right? Because it's, and so I'm really impressed with the Falmouth Town Council's relationship with its residents. And the other thing that is really impressive in Falmouth is the quality of the elected officials that are elected in Falmouth are, I'm sorry, I know you have a wonderful town, but I don't think they could be matched. And I don't say that because they agree with everything that I think. I say that because they're usually balanced. And even those that might be, thinking more on the left side or the right side, usually come back to the middle and really are considerate and try to listen to all the constituent thoughts and needs. Minority opinions that show up at a council meeting, if there's 3 or 4 people that show up and that's it, but they're all against something, they don't look at it as, well, that's only 3 people, forget it, they take that seriously. Yep. I don't know if that helped answer your question.
And how do you think, a follow-up about, the quality of elected officials, how do you think that happens? Does that happen organically, do you think? Or is there some mechanism that causes that to happen?
I think there's a
Falmouth?
mechanism.
Yeah.
And and I don't get involved with that, right?
Right.
I think there are probably organized efforts
Okay.
in the community, could be the political parties, that really try to do that. We have 2 openings right now. One council, we have term limits, and that's in the charter. You can only serve 2 3-year terms as a councilor. You can take a year off and then come back if you want to. We also have term limits on the planning board, the Board of Zoning Appeals, not the Board of Assessment Review. And then we have something called the Long Range Planning Advisory Committee. It used to be called the Comprehensive Plan Advisory Committee. AKA, it's really a comprehensive plan committee, but planning is it is the heart of anything political in Falmouth, is planning. And so years ago, they created term limits for that planning body. Sorry, you asked where was I going?
No, it's okay. Mine was not even my question wasn't even relevant to charter, but you spun it into charter, so thank you.
Yeah.
So, Durwood, I saw you lean in, then Susan, and then Chris.
Maybe this is what Chris was talking about. I don't know. You had said that they find good people for the Charter Commission. I'm assuming you meant the council?
Yeah, the council will appoint the people that they have authority to appoint. And again, I'd have to get the charter up, but let's say it's 3, and there's 9 total. And then there are 6 that have to take out nomination papers. It's like an election. And so does that mean that is the council active at recruiting people to try to get them to run? Absolutely. Sometimes it's hard to get enough people to run. Yeah.
Yeah, and you had said that they find good people.
Yeah.
So I was a little curious about how those.
Counselors. So, I have my annual review in May usually. Hopefully it's coming up in a couple of weeks. And usually they ask me, what do you got, Nathan? What do you got for us? And I sound like a broken record, but I said, your most important job as a counselor, because we have term limits, is you need to make sure you find good people. I don't care what party they're in, but you need to find good people that are going to serve in your position after you leave. And so, that's just part of that machine that you asked me about. I'm not part of all those coffees and discussions in the grocery stores of recruiting, right? You don't want your manager involved in that. But this year, and in a lot of years, we don't even have contested elections. This year, we've got one person that termed out. That's where I was going. And so he's leaving. Coincidentally, he lives next door to the town office, and I remember when I first started in Falmouth, he called me up, he's giving me a hard time about, you need to get a fence in front of the propane tank, it looks terrible, or you need to turn the lights off, and my gut was telling me, this guy's complaining, but I think he's a really nice guy, and you never know, he might be a counselor someday. So he ended up being a counselor. He's a great guy, too. But the other person is an incumbent. He served 3 years, he's the current chair, and so he's running again for his final term. We have had a very consistent council for probably the last 3 or 4 years. We went a stretch where there were councilors that were only serving 1 term because they get on and they're like, holy smokes, this is a lot of work, you know. So we had a lot of that going on. So we didn't have a lot of good continuity. We've had a lot of great continuity in the last 4 or 5 years, and we will for another couple of years. But then the way the term limits are set up, there's going to be a pretty big turnover in about 2 years.
Thanks. Yeah, if you want to follow up.
I had another question. You said the recall percentage went from 10% to 20%, right? And then for citizen initiatives, it was 10%?
Stayed at 10%, yes.
Do you think either one of those will change in the next charter review?
I would doubt it, because the concept behind, if I'm remembering correctly, I can get my old charter notes out, there were actually opinions written on all of these things, and I'm sure you will have to write, I think the law requires you to write a report, that the reason why they didn't change the 10% or up it on the citizen-initiated petitions, because they wanted to keep that, they didn't want to create too big of a hurdle or obstacle for the citizens to, you know, insert their power, but with the recall, they didn't want to make that too easy, because it doesn't take a whole lot to, to drum up some disdain or really concerns. It could be real, it could be fabricated, and it really, you can spin out 900 or 1,000 signatures pretty easily. So, and I think that came close one time, maybe right before that last charter revision, and so they decided they needed to up the threshold to recall an elected official.
Thank you very much.
Wood?
Yeah, Nathan, good to see you. You've worked in town meeting
Oh, you're Mike Durwood, I think. There you go.
You've worked in town meeting style of government towns, and now you're in a council form of government town. Which do you prefer? Which do you feel is most efficient and effective, and why?
Yeah. Boy, I think it depends on the town, right, and the size. And I can't imagine Falmouth functioning the way it's currently functioning in a town meeting form of government.
Say it again.
I can't imagine Falmouth functioning the way it's functioning now in a town meeting form of government. So, for instance, the legislative body, which is not the Board of Selectmen, as you know, it's town meeting in a town
Right.
meeting form of government, is the only entity that can purchase property. Or dispose of property. And Falmouth has been really big into open space acquisition and working with partnership with its land trust. It couldn't have landed a lot of those real estate deals by only having to go to town meeting once a year. The budget process, the council has the ability to do things mid-year that they wouldn't if it were a town meeting form of government. And when you start having a more complex budget, TIF districts, sewer districts, you're spending a lot more money out there, capital projects, cost of projects going up. It can really slow you down, I think, in a more complex, larger organization. So that's why I think it works really well for Falmouth. It happens to be similar size to your community and makeup. Town meeting form of government, I think, also has its place in some communities.
So do you
It
think
worked
there's
very
sort of
well in Kennebunkport when I was
do you
there.
think there's an evolution that happens in a town, that it gets bigger and more sophisticated and growth issues and things that make it more productive to function as a council and
I do.
as a manager with the council?
I do, and I don't know, I haven't read up or haven't seen newspaper articles or letters to the editor or what kind of pressure or direction you folks are going, but it would seem to me that at your size now, and complexity, it's actually a little surprising that you haven't moved in that direction. You know, Buxton is another community that has grown and gotten a lot bigger, but they don't have a lot of the same complexities that you do here. You know, you're a coastal community, a tourist community, you have economic development, community development, a lot of your parks, and you're a full-service, complete community. And
I think somebody said we're the largest town meeting form of government community. At least I heard that from a reliable source.
I don't think we're large. I think we're second large. I think there's one town that's bigger than us that's still on.
doesn't Sanford have some strange?
No, Sanford's a council.
Yeah, they changed themselves to city, though.
Yeah, there's somebody that has a town meeting form of government where they actually have to get elected to be a representative or something. Maybe that's York, I can't remember, but,
I think they did away with that
They did?
in
Okay.
Sanford, yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
But Buxton doesn't have a manager either.
No,
Yeah.
no.
All right. Thanks for that. One follow-up, just tagging on to Durwood's. Were you there when Falmouth transitioned, or has Falmouth always been a town
I don't
council?
think I'd actually been born yet when they transitioned.
Oh, okay.
It's been since,
It's been a
I should
council
have looked the
forever.
number up, but I think it's been since the 60s.
Okay.
And the last town manager served 26 years. I'm in my 17th.
Yeah.
I don't plan on going anywhere. You know, it very well could be that we'll have two managers in 50 years.
Gotcha.
And the manager before the last manager was Oz Bonzi. He passed away a couple of years ago, but he was a legend in town manager world, including internationally. He was the manager, president of the International City Managers Association. So Falmouth has had some good success with longevity with managers. And, you know, Heather and I were talking too that, you know, I think it's getting harder to find candidates to be managers in communities. And managers are being far more selective. So, not that you're looking for a manager right now, but, you know, we're looking at that governance, right? We're looking at who's elected, how long have they served, what does their charter look like? Those are all important things now. And I suppose it's going to become important things for, staff. You know, a police chief isn't going to want to come to a community to know that there's political, motivation or pressure by, needing a confirmation or that they could be investigated. I mean, all of those things are important, I think, of your top hired people, that they want to know that there's a good, strong charter.
Thanks. Chris Babbage, you're up. I had you up next.
Excuse me. Hi, Nathan. I don't know where you live now, but thanks for sharing time.
Bunkport.
Okay, oh,
Still
great.
there.
Well, even though it wasn't such a long ride, thanks for being here. We appreciate
the
the
only
time.
me time I have.
Yeah, exactly.
Irony, though, is I was working in Kennebunkport and living in Falmouth. And 3 years into that, I built a house in Kennebunkport so I could live in Kennebunkport, and then 3 years later, I got a job in Falmouth. So, fortunately, Falmouth said, look, stay there. I have a son with severe disability, so it probably would have cost him a lot to educate him anyway. So, no, they were nice enough to say, we don't care where you live. So,
Oh, thanks. Well, thanks for spending time. Your council in Falmouth, is it 7?
yep.
Any at-large district?
No wards, no districts. Yep.
You do have a recall provision. Do you specify reasons? I know that Yarmouth is next door.
Yeah, I think they do.
They have no
I think they
reasons
do.
in Yarmouth. I
Yep.
didn't know if, do we have a copy of the Falmouth? Yeah, do you know?
I can pull it
Yeah,
up if you'd
it's
like.
easy.
Well, I'm just, if you could share the reasons that you might have for recall, I'd be interested in that.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. And also, if there are reasons, then who determines whether those reasons have been met? I guess is what I'd like to know. Just a comment on town manager, because that's going to, that's a huge question that we'll be looking at later in our schedule. And, there does seem to be a natural evolution. And the makeup, maybe a more professional, higher income community would have more of a tendency to trust, whatever. I think that I've experienced both working very well. You know that a town meeting allows everybody equal access, which is painful and enlightening. You know what I mean? There's definitely pros and cons to that. I will share that in a community that I lived in where there was a contentious issue, we had the defeat of a budget and then a second budget meeting. But because of the town meeting, everything was aired, everybody heard the same information, everybody saw the process, understood the vote, and left, perhaps grumbling, but understanding the process, and there was no mistaking what the two sides were, where the town decided to go. And that was very positive. But the efficiency and I think you talk about the purchase of land, which obviously sometimes a town wants to take advantage of when they can in an efficient manner. I know Mert mentioned that we haven't had a lot of special town meetings recently. Is there a way of empowering the council or the select board to expand its authority so that we would only have that one annual town meeting? If we didn't have I'm thinking out loud here because I'm not sure where I am on this subject, but I'm exploring it out loud with you. But if there was a quorum that was not met, then it would default to the town select board to make a determination on those.
A quorum that wasn't met.
I read somewhere that one town has a quorum for town meeting. If the quorum is not met, then the decision-making defaults to the council.
Interesting.
Or the board. Yeah. I'm just wondering what you're given all of your experience and all of that, when you react to that?
Again, I think the complexity, the size of the organization, it gets harder and harder for someone going to town meeting to fully understand all of those warrant articles and all of it combined. And so I think the evolution of starting to rely on representation makes some sense. We wouldn't have town meetings as you know, to develop state legislation. And sometimes there are decisions made at town meeting by very few that can negatively impact a lot of others. I'll give you an example. When I was in Kennebunkport, we tried 2 years to get a townwide revaluation funded at town meeting. The last year, the waterfront properties were valued at about 20% their full valuation. The interior properties were valued at about 60. So there's a major disparity there. So when I was driving home from town meeting, I remember it was a pretty nice day, and it was so nice that a lot of people were working out in their yards. And in my car, with the window closed, I'm yelling at the people going by, "You just basically screwed yourself, I'm sorry, out of $3,000 or $4,000 a year paying more taxes than you should because you chose not to go to town meeting today."
Not to support a reval, that kind of thing?
Right, and so, back then, though, we didn't have the way to communicate things the way we do today, right? To get the public more engaged and understand, what they were talking about. But you can get into a situation, I think, where it's a smaller group that can make those decisions based on, their own personal benefit. Hopefully elected officials are not doing that. I have not experienced that yet in Falmouth, where I felt like the council or a councilor was voting on something for their own personal benefit.
So if I can just ask one more. You really don't have this particular experience to fall back on, but what I'm wondering is, in a community that has had town meeting, and even people that don't go to town meeting, sometimes feel security in that they could, you know what I mean, and make a stink if they wanted to. Have you had anybody express frustration with access to the council or to?
No, if anything, frustration that the council's not changing their mind or going along with what they want. But like I said, sometimes you'll see, this week, we have an open mic public forum at the beginning of our second meeting of the month. And there were some folks that weren't happy with the budget public hearing 2 weeks earlier. And so there was a concerted effort, I think, to go grab a couple of extra citizens to come express themselves at the podium at the beginning. So 2 people turned into 6 people. It didn't move the needle on the budget, but the residents had the ability to go talk to the council about some of their frustrations. But they don't get to vote.
Thank you for that. Thank you.
I did look it up, and there are no qualifications for what constitutes a recall in the Falmouth Town Charter. And I was also curious, Nathan, I don't see it, so I don't think it's true, but your counselors operate as in wardless, like, there's no wards in the council, correct? Yeah. Because that was another thing we had come across in our research, was some councils operate in the concept of a representative from a ward, which I think just raises the bar even higher, given our participation rate. So, but, yeah, cool. Yeah, thank you. Any other questions for Nathan while he's here?
I would have one
Yeah,
if I
go
could.
ahead, Martin.
Kristen. Yeah. Nathan, I'd be interested, and I'm sure the commission would too, would be interested in your thoughts on elected versus appointed town clerks.
Oh, yeah.
Because that's a subject that we haven't discussed, but it's one that will be discussed.
You're one of the few holdouts here at Size Town
No,
this way, are you?
I'm appointed now.
Oh, you are appointed?
Yeah, I've been
Okay.
appointed since 2014.
So what do you have, like an administrative code or ordinance? Is that
The
by
charter,
ordinance?
the
Oh, you
charter.
have a charter, okay.
Yes, we have
Yep.
the charter.
Yep. When it comes to staff, I would even advocate the county sheriff shouldn't be elected. I think it should be a county police chief, to be honest with you. Why would you politicize, have an election for someone that's going to be
You mean
paid
elected
to
or
serve
appointed,
the people
Nathan?
that then reports to the elected representatives?
You said that you'd prefer to have them elected, the county sheriff?
No, I mean,
You prefer to have them appointed?
Yeah, and
Yeah.
so the answer to
agree.
your question is, I think clerks should be, at this point, appointed. It's a professional position, and quite frankly, why even put that clerk through that burden of having to go through an election process, so often? And I'll probably get in trouble on the sheriff thing, but, I was trying to make a point. Yeah, exactly. But I was just trying to make a point that I think if you're being paid a full salary to serve the people, then I think you should be appointed and report to an elected official.
So the other thing I would suggest when you get back on your charter where you're making check marks to change things, having gone through the recall, which is a pretty bad experience, get some reasons and have them vetted.
Okay, will do. Thank you. We'll use your experience. Yep.
I'll come to you in a minute, Gil. And just to tag on to Merton's, in Falmouth, does the town manager or does the clerk report to you as the town manager or the
Yes.
council?
Yes.
Okay.
Reports to
All
me.
right. Because that was another point of conversation that I know that has been going on, was around, well, it could still be an appointed position, but maybe it reports to the council instead of the town manager or something to maintain like a level of independence there. But thanks. Brenda, I've got Brenda next, then I've got Gail, then I've got Susan.
Are there a number of citizen committees in the structure, and what is their role? Or first of all, how do they become members of a committee, and what is their role?
So we have a number of citizen committees, as most towns do, and they are all appointed by the town council. The town council has a subcommittee called the Appointments Committee. And so if a resident and we're constantly recruiting, right? I'm sure you are too. You're like, we need a position on the Board of Assessment Review, or the Planning Board, the Board of Zoning Appeals, or Conservation Commission. We have all of those, the quasi-judicials, the advisory committees. So they'll apply, and they'll go meet with the Appointments Committee, little mini interview. It takes a lot to not get appointed, I think. And, we don't have a long list of people on the waiting list. So it's tough everywhere to try to get those volunteers to serve on those committees. So I did say that there are 2 categories, right? There are the advisory committees, and then there are the quasi-judicial. Quasi-judicial being Board of Assessment Review, Sewer Appeals, BZA, Board of Zoning Appeals, and the Planning Board. And the council is very, very, very careful about not interfering in those quasi-judicial proceedings. They know to stay out of that. We don't really have a lot in our charter on that, but by practice, they do that. The advisory committees, I have probably a dozen of them. I should say Falmouth has them, they're not mine. Wellness Committee, Shellfish Committee, Harbor Committee, Conservation Commission, Land Management and Advisory Committee, because we own so much property. After like 5 or 6 years of buying a lot of property, we bought a lot during the recession, you know, buy low. And the town did a great job doing that. And all of a sudden, we're like, oh my gosh, how are we gonna manage all this? So we created an advisory committee to help manage that. We have something called the Parks and Community Programs Advisory Committee that provides guidance to that department. But they're appointed by the council. And once a year, they come to the council, they come to a podium like this, and they'll give their annual report. We also have something called an annual work plan process. I just sent out the doodle poll today to find out what people's availability is in July, and we have a facilitator, and it's an all-day session. And what the council does is they take a look at what the work plan was the year before. There could have been 48 things on it, there could have been 75, and what didn't we get done, and what did we get done, and do we want to continue to work on things that we haven't got done, and what does the comp plan say we should do? And you know, they look at all the reports that have implementation strategies, and they develop that plan, and then they basically then assign who's going to work on this, what advisory committee is going to work on this. So we'll have ad hoc committees. You know, lots of times ad hoc committees turn into permanent committees. You know, sustainability is not ad hoc. It's going to continue. So that's a really good process for us. So then they distribute the work. And then they also assign council liaisons to all of those committees. So we have our annual organizational meeting every June. The charter actually calls it out. We have it the third Monday in June. It's after the elections. That's when the chair is selected, the vice chair, all the committee assignments. They have 3 subcommittees. They have Community Development Committee, which is the committee that's responsible for any ordinance amendment or development that is related to anything land use. And then there's an Ordinance Committee. That's the third committee. I already told you there was an Appointments Committee. The Ordinance Committee picks up all the ordinances that aren't land use related. And they're all pretty busy. The chair is not responsible to serve on any of the committees because they have other responsibilities. Some of the regional groups that meet, we have something called the Metro Coalition, which is the city of Portland and all the surrounding suburban communities. It's the chairs, the mayors, the managers, or the administrators from all those communities. They meet once a month, and they have an agenda, and they talk about things of regional interest. So the chair is expected to work on things like that and let the committees be worked on by non-council leadership. Yep. Oh, and there are staff liaisons as well to all of those committees. Yep. And I get to select that.
Ted, were you looking to tag on to Brenda's point? Okay, go for it.
Thank you. In connection with the say advisories and ad hoc committees in your own experience, so the council appoints them, and then they have a liaison, then the town, there's a town staff liaison. What is the role of the town manager in managing that? Or the committees only report with this annual thing to the town council, or how does that work in terms of your role in dealing with these, not the quasi-legal, but the others?
Yeah, so fortunately, by delegating to staff liaisons, I'm a little more hands-off on that. But I have staff that report to me once a week with a weekly update, and they'll let me know what's going on in their committees. The council liaisons really take more of a role than I do with those advisory committees because they report out at one of the council meetings every month. It's the fourth Monday of the month, where at the beginning of the agenda, it's called committee reports. And so sometimes there are a lot and sometimes there aren't. And so it could be that the counselor that's the liaison to the Conservation Commission will report to the rest of the counselors. The Conservation Commission met last week. They're making progress on their watershed management protection strategy and the pesticide ordinance or whatever it is that they're working on, and to update the rest of the counselors. what I'll do is if I see something that, that pops, right, it's my responsibility to, that's something the council should know about, right? And a few things like that happened this week. There were a couple of boo-boos that I was able to intercept. And so I went immediately to the appointments committee chair of the council. I said, hey, look, a couple of hiccups, these things happened, but we're deploying a new system to make sure it doesn't happen again. What do you think? And so we had a few communications about that. So I jump in when I have to on those. I also substitute. If I have a vacancy and somebody needs to staff one of the committees for 2 or 3 months, then I might step in and do that.
Jay?
And so in effect, the use the word power more. So if there's a committee that, as you said, there's a glitch or something wrong, or there's something that's not doing what it's supposed to do, or whatever is going on, and you see it, your staff sees that, the town council staff might see that, but where's the action if there's some unhappiness in there?
Sure. So the example this week was it was discovered that one member of a board had not attended enough meetings. And so our ordinance, not the charter, dictates attendance policy for all these boards and committees. And what I discovered was, and then I started looking at all of the other attendance tables that were supposed to be monitored of all the other committees, and I found another one. And so this morning at the department head meeting, we talked about that. I'd already talked to the appointments committee chair, who was a counselor, earlier in the week about it, so I kept him advised of this. And of course, in this situation, this is not even staff, right? I'm helping the council with their appointment. These are their people. But they're depending on us to manage this system to make sure. So we've started to, there's a few more expectations now. We talked about it this morning. But that was that interrelation with staff and interrelation, I don't know if that's a word, but
But it's clear that in effect, you're doing this on behalf of the council.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Yep. As a matter of fact, in this particular case, I'm getting into some details here, but it was brought to this counselor's attention. It skipped me, and that's when I brought staff. I said, "Hey, whoa, okay, let's remember, you're the staff liaison, but these committees are not our committees. They're the council committees, and so that's at a level where you should have probably brought it to me." And then I would take care of it with the appointments committee chair. So I'm not throwing anybody under the bus right now. All of the staff work really well together. We hammered all these things out this week. But I guess what this story tells you is it demonstrates, part of the management function, the staff function, the relationship with the advisory committees, and how the council gets involved. Right? It's not something that we swept under the rug. We immediately brought it to the attention that it needed to and took care of it. Yep.
All right, Chris, are you following up on that, or? Okay, go for it.
Clarification, really. Thank you. So earlier you had said, Nathan, that it wouldn't be unusual for a resident to call the council directly rather than the town manager. Is that also true of the members of the town committees?
Interesting question. It's not really permitted at the quasi-judicial level,
That's what I
right? And when it does, our members are really good about not letting that happen. If the public
I
wants
was trying to get deeper into, you said they're council committees, not the town managers committees.
Correct.
But how does that show itself? So what, I guess is what I'm asking.
So
What
like
does
if a
that- what does that
citizen
mean?
has a problem with, that's a terrible project, we don't need another 4-story building on Route 1, I'm calling the planning board chair and let him know what I think. All right, the planning board chair knows that that's a quasi-judicial process, and they're not going to have a conversation with that person about it. That person will probably politely say, look, you can call the community development director or the senior planner, and I encourage you to go to the next planning board meeting and speak at the podium, but that's how we're going to deal with this. If it's an advisory committee and someone's got a great idea on a no idling policy and they're calling, they want to call the chair of the energy committee or the climate action committee, then that chair would most often, in my experience, would have coffee with the person or meet with them and then bring that to the committee and say, hey, I heard from, Joe down the road, and they've got a great idea. We really don't need an ordinance to try to get this going. We could have a pilot project or something. So it works. The citizens have access to that. If they don't know how, they can find their way. We also have a biweekly newsletter where we're trying to put out information that we think the public will want. We've actually started to do something too called fact sheets. So when questions come up, people don't understand something, right? And so we'll create these one-page like fact sheets. You can find them on our website. And what's really good too is you might not be able to find it easily. A fact sheet, I didn't know you had those. Well, it's great for the council, right? So if these questions come up and then we say, you know what, that's a good topic for a fact sheet. Now, the next time a constituent calls you, you say, I've got an answer for you on a noise ordinance or on why we do something a certain way. And they send them the link of the fact sheet. And it really, really works well. It's a convenient tool for elected officials to answer questions.
Nathan,
Like an FAQ, but a little bit expanded.
Yeah, you said you were hands-off a lot of the time. You didn't need to be involved with every decision and so forth. So if you have sounds like an efficient mechanism, who are the folks immediately under you? What does the structure look like in Falmouth?
Sure. Yeah, so we have about 12 departments. You got Parks and Community Programs, Public Works, Wastewater. It's not a district, it's a department, so they report to me. They used to be combined with Public Works, but it was because we actually had an employee that was capable of managing both. When he retired, we split it off. And I was able to do that with guidance from the council. Assessing is regional, as I said.
I guess what I'm asking is, if you had to make a bigger decision and you had 2 or 3 people in the room, 3 or 4 people in the room, who would those people be?
A decision on...
Well, I guess that's what I'm asking. Do you have an assistant town manager?
We have an assistant town manager / HR director, but that is going to change July 1. The budget this year funded that position to go from 1 to 2. So we're going to have a separate HR position and a separate assistant manager position. Yep.
Thank you. Yep. Thanks.
Gail, I've got you up next, if you've still got it.
Oh,
Yeah.
if I can answer that question, I'm not completely hands-off. After the, I love dealing
No, I
with
didn't mean that in a
constituents.
derogatory way.
Monday's council meeting, it was raining Monday, and I've been trying to set up a time to meet with this resident that's out in the western part of town. And he has these, a neighbor with, I think they call them predator warning lights that flash or strobe on the perimeter of the property, and he was really bothered by it. And so I brought it to the ordinance committee of the council, and they're like, we've never heard of something like that. They must be disputing neighbors or something. He got back to me and he was pretty upset. I said, you know what, I don't know what you're talking about. I gotta see this. So I went out with a sergeant in the police department to go look at them after the council meeting on Monday night. I love talking with residents that way. By the way, this might be a new thing. Keep your eye open for it. When I went out there and I looked at it, I was blown away. And it was blue. It looked like it was a crime scene in New York City. All these flashing blue lights everywhere. Anyways, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No. Yeah, sorry, I think you're going to have to maybe share the podium, Gail.
Yeah.
But
Gail Spofford. May I ask Nathan some direct questions?
of course.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you. How would a council change the expense to the town? So, for instance, now, we don't pay them. Just like the school board, I'm on the school board, it doesn't get paid. I'm sorry, you do pay them, you pay them very little. The school board doesn't get paid. But we have more members, so most of what we do, because we have 12 members, almost everything we do is at the committee level. And committee meetings are open to the public, the agendas are published. Sometimes we have no public participation. We have community members who apply because people who volunteer in the school district have to have background checks, so they have to fill out a form. But we don't deny entrance to the meeting for anyone. So we get some incredibly valuable questions at the committee level that members of the school board might not think about. I mean, things come up that we're so busy looking at the big stuff, we don't see the little things. And so I felt, because I've been on the board before, that was an incredibly good and efficient way to run the district, was at the committee level. But this board is not large enough. The select board in town here is just not large enough to do that. You don't have enough members, because I serve on 2 subcommittees, policy and finance. And tomorrow morning, will go to something because I choose to, because I like to be informed. The facilities committee is at 7:30, and the HR committee is at 9 o'clock, I think, or maybe, no, yeah, 9 o'clock, I guess. And then I'm going to another meeting tomorrow afternoon, because I asked for a special policy committee meeting. But all of our work is done at that level, that their agendas have to be made public beforehand, they're posted. And so I'm concerned that when you go to a council meeting and you are no longer using mostly volunteer information from people who are on committees, you used to have to start paying for people as employees. So I'm wondering, but, you may not have the answer now, and I'm not sure a council form of government is the worst idea for this town. I was really glad they expanded the select board, but it didn't quite go far enough. I mean, personally, I thought it should go farther so that you could have subcommittees that would be run by a quorum of your board. So I would like that to be a big discussion. I know that we're similar in size to Falmouth, but I'm not sure we're similar in makeup, only because, and we might be, I don't know about Falmouth, but we seem to be attracting a lot of older people from areas where they were not included in the governance of wherever it was they lived, and they're less likely to volunteer. And so at the school level, we have we can have up to 3 community volunteers on each of our committees. On finance, we have 2, one from Arundel, one from Kennebunk. On the policy committee, we only have 1. And I'm so glad we have her, because she always asks that question that nobody else thinks to ask. But we can't get more volunteers. For some reason, we don't. So,
Question for Nathan?
well, that was the primary question. What's the demographics of because we seem to be having about a 40%, or an increase to about 40% of people who are over 60. And I'm wondering if that impacts who you can get to volunteer. That was my one question. And I just wanted to say about appointing a town clerk. Part of the argument was we were electing people who were not qualified to fill the position, and then we had to pay to train them. So that was a consideration as well. So if you don't mind explaining the demographics, thank you.
Sure. I think you also asked something about how would you go about council pay, and
How does that change?
yeah, so good timing, because we actually had an ordinance introduction, or maybe it was a hearing this past Monday. It's by ordinance. The council pay is dictated by ordinance, not by charter. And it's a good ordinance because it basically says when you change the pay, it can't be in effect until the next fiscal year, so it's not so self-serving. We actually changed it 4 years ago, right before the pandemic. Pandemic hit, the council said, we don't want to increase our pay in a pandemic. And so it came back around, and we had a minor amendment. They hadn't had an increase in like 25 years, I think. They get paid $2,000 apiece. The chair gets an extra $1,000, and they were doing it by meeting. They had to submit to the town clerk, each meeting they went to, and we changed it because we don't have an attendance issue to just be an automatic default quarterly payment of $500. So, but that's how they deal with council pay. It's in the ordinance. By the way, we have 4 committees of the council. I forgot to mention one. We have a finance committee. That was the 4th. So our citizenry, like you, we are starting to attract more and more older people. Younger people can't afford to live in our community. So we do have a housing issue just like you do, and we're trying to start to finally maybe do something about that. I also was surprised to learn, this was a couple of years ago when we looked at some of the census figures that, and I don't know how they figured this out, but since 2010, but this was like 3 years ago, like 35% of our population had changed over. It was different. different people. Since 2000, it was over 50%. So that told me that it was becoming, the citizenry was changing over quite a bit. Because one of the things that I hadn't been in a community longer than 6 years, and we started to get a lot of pushback from the community about something back in 2017 for something that we had gone through all the public processes, the comp plan and everything else, and we had our direction and the public behind it, and all of a sudden we were finding these new people were coming forward and telling us that we were crazy. And it started, and I talked to the school superintendent about it as well, and he'd only been here 7 years. He goes, yeah, it's really crazy. I'm seeing such a changeover in the population. And that also affected our call fire department. We had a really strong call fire department, and the chief and I knew it wasn't a matter of if, it was a matter of when we were going to have to go to a full-time department. But we were pulling out all the tricks to try to stave that off because we knew it was going to be a really expensive thing to do. And but what happened, what we didn't see was the exponential failure on it. And it wasn't because of the culture or they didn't like the chief. But the call firefighters were aging out, but their sons and daughters weren't following their footsteps, and there weren't a lot of those traditional multi-generational families still in town. It was people moving in, and if you asked our citizenry, I bet 90% of them would have said they thought we had a full-time fire department, and we didn't. So that was a huge change for us over the last 2 or 3 years. It's created a lot of issues because of the tax rate impact, but we've gone from volunteer to completely a full-time department and had to hire 32 firefighters. It was almost a $4 million hit. And other towns are starting to see that around us. It's not a good situation, especially for smaller towns. In our school population, student population has been flat for nearly, I think, 10 or 12 years. We had a proposed fairly big housing development that was being proposed 4 or 5 years ago that was developed a lot of public concern, and a lot of it was overcrowding in the schools. And we were running the projections then and said, we don't think that's going to happen. As a matter of fact, we probably need the students. And that's turned out to be true. We're starting to project even some declines. And I know Kennebunkport's seeing that over at Consolidated School. Yeah. Hopefully that answers your question and then some.
Thanks, Nathan.
Okay.
Finally, I've got Susan up.
Thanks, Chris. This has been very helpful. Thank you for your time. I really appreciate it. You said that there's an open, I wanted to understand this, there's an open mic opportunity before council meetings?
Yeah, so we have two, is that the last of your question?
No.
Okay.
So, yes. So that there are no wards, citizens could approach any council member about anything that would be of interest to them if they have
Absolutely. It happens
some
all the
issue.
time.
Or they would go to whomever they think they could sway.
Sure.
Right. So I want to make sure that people still have the opportunity to voice their concerns to council members if we were to change our form of government. People can speak to council members, or I was a little confused. If they had some issue in mind, would they be better served by going to a committee? They go to a council member, or would they go to a committee chair to speak their piece about something that they're interested in?
I suppose it depends on the resident and who they know, right? If they happen to know the chair of the committee or somebody on it that they have an interest in, they might go that direction. Or they are neighbors to one of the counselors, and that counselor knows really very little about that committee. They're not the liaison. That counselor knows, though, who the council liaison is, and they take it very seriously. Citizen inquiries, our council goes above and beyond on the customer service side of things. So, and lots of times they'll reach out to me. They'll say, hey, Nathan, can you help me out here? We even have it set up so that this is our choice. but when citizens reach out to the council as a whole through our website, you can select all council or one counselor. I get blind copied on that. And the reason for that is so that then I can provide an assist to the counselor. Let's say there's a technical question, right? And so I can say, hey, Pete, the chair, I said, let me know if you need a hand on this, or I'll know he needs a hand, and I'll say, hey, here's the link to that in this meeting and that meeting. This might be helpful. So they have a lot of access to the council and to committees. There's no reason why anyone can't find someone to talk to about any subject they want.
Very important point. Thank you
Yeah.
very much.
Yep.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Yes, Gil.
Gail Spofford. May I ask a direct question
Yeah.
again? Nathan, do you have a remote option for council members if they're unable to attend? Nathan said yes.
Nathan said yes. All right. Great. All right. Well, Nathan, thank you so much for attending and being a part of this process and taking the time out of your Wednesday evening to be here with us. We really appreciate it. Yeah. Thank you. All right. That was very helpful. All right, moving on. Our next agenda item, old business. Last time we reviewed action items, and then we spent a lot of time talking about the recall article that Stephen and Janice drafted, which is also the major topic of tonight. So if there's no questions, comments, concerns about old business, I'll move on to new business. All right, seeing none, we'll move on to new business. I had on the agenda, first up, I wanted to give Dick and Durwood a chance to speak to the first draft. I know, Durwood, you mentioned a few things last time, but you really hadn't had time to review it last time. And
Sure, I'd yield my time on this, and let's just go into the second draft.
All right.
And I think it's much improved, and I have comments about it, but in due time,
Great.
I'll make them.
Thanks, Durwood. There is copies of the second draft up on the document buffet over there next to Ted Trainer. I did notice that I think Merton painstakingly went through and corrected a printing arrangement issue with the drafts. He numbered them by hand, I think, of the drafts.
Yes.
Because the pages are out of order. So if you're going through it and flipping through it and saying, hey, why are the references on page 2? You can look at the numbers on the bottom, and it's not much of a
And I'll
flip
put
to get
page
to.
numbers on after this, so I'm sorry.
no,
Apologize
it's
for not
okay.
doing that.
Listen, I want to say now, what Janice Vance is doing for this committee is so phenomenal.
Yeah.
I mean, because still, no one has applied for the position, and she's doing all this work, and it really is just great.
Yeah.
So thank you.
Yeah.
Huge.
Thank you, Merton.
Merton's going to make a paper plate award. All right, so let's start going through it. Do people want to speak directly to it, or I know, Janice, you've amended things and called out areas that you want to go over. What do you think? Does everyone think it's best just to go through those comments and resolve those, and then we can, if we have time, speak to other things?
Yeah, I mean, in the beginning, Stephen and I have been working on this since, too. And so, Stephen, do you want to speak to your suggestion to section 7.01 as far as the order of the information there? Because I didn't have that noted here, but that's something we were talking about just recently.
Sure. Let me just say, the second draft actually does not contain any of my comments. I had not reviewed it before it was sent around. Janice, with commendable diligence, circulated it to the entire committee before I'd had the opportunity to read it. And I have a lot of comments, but I'd like to pass on those and just hear what everybody else has to say, because I think the third iteration of this is really going to be the one that is important. And we had some technical glitches. Janice and I have been in discussion about some of these things, and unfortunately they haven't made it into this version yet. One example is just to take it a little bit out of order, we found a considerable difficulty in addressing specifically the reasons for recall, because you have to consider those reasons in conjunction with forfeiture of office. Forfeiture of office is a lot more concrete. It's a much more streamlined process than a recall election. But one of the things that I have to say really struck me was when I looked at the draft, the legislative document 1443, which is the draft that was prepared by Dan Sayer. There are two other bills currently before the legislature, 1102 and 1181, I think. But one of the provisions that Dan Sayer's bill proposed, it was addressed solely to school board members. So that's a very interesting proposal. School board members are going to be carved out and treated under state legislation for different treatment from others, and that's an interesting development. There are a number of specific reasons carved out in this bill for recall, and I'll just recite them to you. While acting as a school board member has behaved in a manner that relates to and adversely affects the administration of the school board member's office and the rights and interests of the public. Again, the last session that we had, that formulation might be justly accused of being a bit nebulous and difficult to apply. But number two, has committed an act of misconduct in office. Same comment with respect to that. Number three, has failed to perform duties prescribed by law. And number four, has willfully misused, converted, or misappropriated without authority public property or public funds entrusted to or associated with the school board. Again, those are much more broad sort of political, not political, but disqualifying events that may give rise to a recall election that don't rise to the level of immediate forfeiture of office. In other words, as sort of an argument that the electorate may have that a particular elected official has failed to fulfill these particular duties. But and I think that these particular formulations of grounds for a recall election, they can be justly criticized for being a bit too vague. But listen to this, because this is the very brilliant suggestion that Dan Sayer's legislation makes, or proposed legislation makes. He comes it from the other angle, and that is not what justifies a recall, but what will not justify a recall. And that's a great suggestion. And here is the formulation. A school board member's discretionary performance of a lawful act or a prescribed duty is not a ground for recall. And I suggest, for example, that we include that, or something very akin to it, as Section 703. Immediately after the grounds for recall, we have a section, what is not a ground for recall. And that is very much like the central argument that was involved in the recall election here. And if one of our objectives is to preserve the right for recall elections, but that it should be properly circumscribed or constrained. But if that's one of the reasons, you've got to have. I'll just leave it at that. But that's just one example of an idea that has just cropped up in the last week or so, two weeks or so. Yeah. I might say that both Janice and I have taken the opportunity to submit comments on each of these three pieces of proposed legislation, written comments, because we couldn't appear via Zoom. But we made it perfectly clear, we made no claim in our comments that we were in any way forwarding the views of the Commission or that we were even on a Commission. These views were submitted purely as private citizens.
Correct.
And what's as important as the reasons is who's going to determine if those reasons are valid enough or not?
Well,
Because that played very
That's a very
much.
good point, because that raises one of the points of discussion, I think, from Chris Babbage. Who makes a determination that this is a legitimate recall petition in the first place? Should there be a process for that? I mean, it's sort of dangerous, because then you have minority rule, so to speak, and, you know, what kind of appeal rights do you have? What's the standard of review, et cetera? Every time you make a suggestion like that, there are it's like peeling an onion. You know, there are other issues that you have to address. For example, you might say that any time that there's a recall petition, these are not going to be, it's not going to be something that is particularly usual. I mean, there's only been one in Kennebunk's experience. So I think that there's a good argument to be made that a committee should be appointed, maybe the town attorney, maybe a select board member, and maybe a member of the particular body upon which the target individual sits. And they sit and they prepare, they do an investigation as to the validity of the allegations that are made. They come up with a written report that's submitted to the select board, and the select board has a public hearing on that. At the same time, a recommendation could be made if as to whether the select board should consider suspending a person temporarily or not. That's a subject that gives me a lot of pause, because if you've got someone who's clearly committed misconduct of an inappropriate nature, you don't want that person necessarily in office. On the other hand, just consider if there's an automatic suspension, which is what Durwood suggested, for good reasons. But one of the problems with an automatic suspension or disqualification from continuing to exercise public duties is what happens if you have a strategic effort to file a recall petition that is aimed specifically at obtaining disqualification of that person from voting for a certain period of time? There could be important things that are discussed during that. So how do you balance those two issues? And I'm not sure that we really have gotten our grips around that in the second draft. And so what I'd like to do is to hear the ideas on that, and Janice too, obviously, and come up with a mechanism to address that suspension. I noticed that in this redraft there was no language regarding recounts or anything like that, which is okay. I mean, we could just default to the state statute on that, but there are some things in the recount statute that you might want to address specifically, because if the effort is to restrict the liberality of the use of this particular device, which is subject to inherent abuse, one of the ways to do that is to address deposits that are necessary when there's a recount, and the forfeiture of deposits if you don't get the necessary number of votes. And this current draft doesn't do any of that. So those are just a few ideas that
Yeah,
I had.
I see a lot of hands, and thanks for unpacking all that, Stephen. That's a lot. And as it is a lot, I think, you know, to tag on to what you were initially leading into there, and what the doubt that Chris placed in my mind at last meeting about the grounds for recall of an elected official, and this has been turning in my head for the past few weeks around, well, if we have a section covering forfeiture of office, which is a black and white and a very straightaway way to say, you know, the first bullet point under 702 there is conviction of any crime, right? Obviously, someone who's been convicted of a crime should...
But
Go ahead.
Durwood pointed out to me last time that Maine doesn't have a distinction between felonies and misdemeanors. It's got class A, B, C, D, and E crimes. What about a speeding ticket? That's a crime.
Yeah.
I mean, we in judiciary still refer to felonies and misdemeanors. The penalty is either a year or more or less than a year. That's the distinction.
No, it's fine. I'm okay with this being kind of open discussion.
Yeah, I mean, I understand what Dermot's saying, but the
Yeah.
Attorney General and the Judiciary Committee use the term all the time, understanding the distinction of the severity of the penalty.
A, B, and C are usually thought of as felonies, and D and E as misdemeanors. But they don't use that term in the statute. And I think you need to address that, and also, is it a crime anywhere in the world, in the state,
Yeah.
in another state?
Right.
I mean, because we're a
So-
multinational.
May I piggyback on
Yeah,
Steve's?
go for it.
Yeah, thanks. I did not expect anybody to get a chance, and by the way, for you folks that's there, if you got it, thanks. Already online? Oh, well, anyway, I just wanted to point, I did, I think, what Stephen was looking for there, and so I started with the forfeiture, and I won't go over that right now because I want to deal with exactly what Stephen just mentioned. And that is 701, well, right of a recall, and 702, and I just want to read out loud that one paragraph. And what I had proposed was...
Which paragraph can you identify?
702. It would be on
702.
page 2 of my handout.
Okay.
Handout that says to Kennebunk Charter Commission from Chris Babbage.
Chris Babbage's handout is over on the document buffet,
Yeah.
and it's the one with the 3 hole punches.
Yeah. So it says, this is on the second page, back of the first page. After election, an elected official may be recalled from office by his or her constituency if, in the judgment of the voters, the official has committed misconduct or a serious breach of the public trust. The inclusion of the recall provision in this charter is neither to encourage the harassment on frivolous grounds of capable public officials, nor to vex public officials for their use of judgment in fulfilling the discretionary authority of their office. Instead, the recall is to be a seldom-used democratic tool to provide the constituency recourse if an elected official's behavior, alleged to have risen to a sufficient level of impropriety or breach of the public's trust, warrants an end to that official's representation of his or her constituents. An official's discretionary performance of a lawful act or a prescribed duty is not grounds for recall. That's Dan Sayre's sentence there that I also, like Stephen, thought, I was
Yeah.
going to ask Natalie about, about some of that, more specifically about that, but that appears to be a forceful restatement of what that intention of that paragraph is.
Yep.
I want to say, though, and I'm really, I think Falmouth and Yarmouth don't have reasons
No.
for a reason.
Falmouth is actually, I had it pulled up, it's a very short recall
Right.
provision, and basically...
But what I'm saying is the reason for that, and it may be the reason that an awful lot of communities don't have a recall provision, because some people call this a statement of fact. It's not a statement of fact. No, and a conviction is a statement of fact. A conviction takes a great deal of time, and it's unlikely that if there's a wrongdoing during term of office, that would even be resolved, perhaps during the term. If it's a felony or a Class A, B, or C crime, we can disqualify people if we want them not to be able to serve because of having a felony in their lives. I do point out that doesn't apply to the president. And also, we have a presidential candidate that got 1 million votes while he was in jail. So the trust that is put in the voter is paramount at that level. And so I'm just saying that we can do that, but the difficulty of determining valid reasons is almost a court investigation. And I think that's too much to ask of anybody to do it in a timely fashion in order to justify whether it's right or wrong. I think we can give guidelines. I know Natalie was saying moral turpitude and she mentioned a couple of others that are very common. She said, those are nebulous. We'd love some help with that. What do you mean by that? But, you know, it's like Potter Stewart. I don't, you know, I can't tell you what pornography is, but I know it when I see it. You know, I mean, that's a very difficult legal question for us to try to get to. So I'm wondering, I would prefer not to have reasons. However, if we do decide to go that route, down below I said, halfway down that same page in 703, I said, if we decide to require itemization of the complaint on the petition to inform, instead of just relying on the public hearing to educate the voters, then may we place on the petition, and these are the words I suggested, in the judgment of the petitioner and registered voters listed below, and still consistent with section 702 of the charter, which I had read earlier, the identified official has, and then leave a blank to be filled out, alleged behavior specified, and is therefore subject to be recalled. That would be a statement of fact. It says in the judgment of the petitioner, this person validly qualifies for a recall. That's a fact. It doesn't say that the accusation is fact, because we'll never get there.
I would counter that in the last recall, you had a affidavit presented that had statements on it that were in fact not factual.
Exactly.
Yeah.
My point is, they are not factual.
Okay.
That's why it says in the judgment of the petitioner. It is factual that the petitioner
Okay.
believes this to be true. That's the fact.
I understand your point now. So
But
yeah.
that doesn't mean it's up to the voters to determine
Right.
if it is validly subject to recall.
I understand your point. Yeah. Okay. So thanks for that, Chris. I think this is good language, and this was I think several of us have picked up independently on Dan Sayer's language being a kind of good North Star for this. I'm going to suggest that next time we try to unpack section 702 in conjunction with forfeiture of office, and that we have a deep dive on forfeiture of office to kind of allay, talk about some of these. They coexist, right? They're tightly coupled. And then maybe we use any more time here tonight if we want to go through the other comments. I'm not trying to shut down if anyone has comments on 702 tonight, but I think 702 is a lot to unpack and probably needs to also be unpacked with forfeiture of office in tandem. And because I didn't ask anyone to review forfeiture of office tonight, that's probably out of our scope. Janice, yeah.
Yeah, we started on forfeiture of office, so we
Right.
do have something that we can share.
Yeah.
And, it's really, they're kissing cousins, because, your forfeiture of office is really your internal process. Recall would be a public process.
Right.
But the same logic should
Yes.
hold within each. So we can get that out after Stephen and I can look at it one more time, and we can get it out to everybody. But I had a question I wanted to pose to the group, and this was something that Stephen and I haven't really had a chance to talk about too much. It was Art LeBlanc last meeting, brought up the exact same thing you did. Someone had made allegations that were not factually correct. And so, when that happens, I was trying to come up with, well, how, who could check this? So some of the language we proposed here was, town staff, law enforcement, or other authority, because you could want something that proves that what the person is saying is in fact the
Yeah.
truth, and not just his allegation. I know where Chris is going with that, but I wanted to talk to Natalie about that, so I was upset she's not here tonight. But I'd like you guys to kind of think about that, because we want to prevent anybody being accused unjustly of something. And I guess my question is, how is it treated, how can it be treated legally if someone was to make an untrue statement about somebody else, is there something the accused can do? Is there something the town can do? Because there should be accountability if you lie.
Yeah.
And so, and on that whole thing, I mean, you want the best people you can get in an elected office. And I think we do have very good people. But is there a process in place, and maybe Merton knows, before somebody is considered for, nomination for a select board or something, is there ever a background check done on any of us when we want to become a member of something?
I believe this.
You're not on mic, you're not on your mic.
Yeah.
Just FYI.
Refresh my memory on the current charter. Doesn't the person who qualifies to be recalled has a choice to have a public hearing before the board?
They have a choice to have a public hearing. Yep, go, I mean,
Correct.
Miriam, you can, but
Yeah,
they
and this-
do, but it's very vague as to what that is.
Well, except that person at that public hearing could certainly bring some doubt upon the
Sure.
reasons that are listed.
Yeah.
But in this last recall, the qualified candidate chose, or
Right.
did not, I'm
Right.
assuming chose not to have a public hearing.
Yeah. Miriam, go.
Miriam Whitehouse. What you were just discussing and what you were saying, Chris, just, I was kind of looking at it from the point of view of an accused public official. And I know for a fact, I don't think Tim would mind me saying this, that the reason he did not want to have a public hearing was because he found the whole experience of this recall attempt to be so upsetting that he felt that it would be even more stressful to have to go through that. And he was also angry that he was being unjustly accused. Why should he have to defend himself when he had not done anything wrong? So I'm just wondering if there's some way that you can find language that would more aggressively keep something from happening in the first place when it really shouldn't be happening, that somebody shouldn't be, that there shouldn't be an attempt to recall somebody who has not done anything wrong, rather than putting the burden on the accused to have to come to a meeting and meet with this group and defend themselves. It just doesn't seem fair to people, and in the political climate that we live in, this is why people don't want to run for public office, because they just don't want to let themselves in for that kind of abuse.
Go ahead, Chris. Yep.
Yeah, that's not how I saw the public hearing. I do know that the way the public hearing is set up now, it is offered to the person. And I feel that does put a burden on the person. My idea of a public hearing is just like a proposed law. We have a proposal to recall somebody. All those in favor? Raise your hand, please. Okay, we'll call on you one at a time. All those opposed, we'll call on you one at a time. And questions can be asked and answered. I suppose you could do it that way. I don't know about questions. But my point is the testimony is the important, because you get to hear both sides. Even if an accused person had surrogates. The idea is, I don't know what this is about. How am I supposed to vote? And you listen to people who are advocating one side or another. Even if it's just one side, you can try to make a judgment. I think that's better than an absence of information.
I think what Stephen said earlier is very important, and that is sometimes the reasons that do not constitute the ability to have are more important than the ones that would.
Yeah, I think it's important.
Would you say that again? I'm sorry.
Stephen, why don't you go ahead? You were the one.
You're not on mic.
Previously made the point that one of the brilliant aspects of Dan Sayre's formulation, or his proposed legislation, is that he specifies what is not a ground for recall rather than what is. And it seems to me that if that language had been in the current charter, we never would have had to go through that recall process in the first place.
Yeah.
I mean, there are things that should be in the recall provision. For example, one glaring omission right now is the George Santos problem. What happens if someone deliberately misrepresents their qualifications, their work history, their background, and the voters rely upon that? There's no way to recall that individual? Come on, there's got to be.
Yep. Yeah, no,
Okay.
I agree. Yep.
The way I saw this, Chris, if I
Yep.
could just
Yep.
explain, I still think when we do 702.
Your mic,
advisory.
Chris.
Oh, I'm sorry. I still think that when we're looking at 702 reasons for recall, we are merely expressing the intent of the town fathers as to how this tool could be used. Unless we create a police force to interpret and say yes or no, then this guidance is all it is to justify to the petitioner and to the voter whether or not this is a just recall process. And that's how I see it. Otherwise, you're going to need much more specific language to enforce. And I think that's when we get into some difficulty. So.
Durwood.
Can we just like possibly knock down a few things and agree on a few things? I'm getting the sense we just go round and round.
Yep.
And never like kind of come to consensus. I know this is a difficult thing, but it seems like one thing we could come to consensus on is the role of the clerk. And I hear our wonderful clerk saying, I can't be the judge and decider of all of this. I can't, I won't, it's impossible. So can we agree, at least conceptually, we'll need to vote that there's no gatekeeping at the clerk level in terms of the sufficiency of the allegations, and that all he has to do is count, make sure the petition is properly signed. That's a big enough job.
Yeah, I mean, I think, my off-the-cuff response to that is I think it will come out in the language.
Right.
I don't think we're going to sit here and say, well, it's not him, it's not the town manager.
Well, I was going to go to the next one.
Okay.
It's a town attorney, which I thought, I kind of played around with that a little bit, but I'm the town attorney, have been the town attorney in many towns, and that would be a very odd
Yeah.
position for the town attorney. It's kind of nice to let them decide. They know about the law. They don't live in town. They don't have a horse in the race, but they don't have any standards. And so the charters often say that the town attorney determines whether an ordinance is constitutional or not, and that is something that an attorney is trained to do. Does this violate this provision of the Constitution or that? But not whether it's factually based. And,
Right.
so I think that's a mistake to go down that road. So it seems what you've got is a spectrum of those towns, and those are most of the towns that say no bar, requirement of entry.
Yeah.
To something that's the other end of the spectrum is conviction of a crime. Then you got this kind of amorphous in-between place, things that bring disgrace upon the body, and that type of language, and some very good towns are using that. But that, I think I agree with Chris, that's got to be decided by the voters. I mean, I don't see how the town clerk decides that. And so if we could just get to that, and I think some real progress was made here tonight in terms of this idea of it doesn't include the discretion. I think that's fantastic. I mean, that's a great way. And I struggled with whether to have this even introductory language, but it sets the tone of what what recalls are about in our town. Compared to other towns where they just say nothing. And also, if it ever went to court, it would set the tone for the judge to understand what the philosophy is of the town. It gives almost like some history. And so I think those sentences were very good in the introduction. It's been pared down a little bit, which is good. So if we could just focus on the 702 next time.
Yep.
and figure out if that covers it,
Yep.
it seems like it'd be a vast improvement.
Yeah, I think we need to get more focused, so that we're not spinning so much.
Right.
And I think next time, let's devote ourselves to studying Section 702. Janice and Stephen will circulate the forfeiture language. And hopefully if we go over this is where my head's at right now, and, I'm welcome for feedback. If we go over the forfeiture language, pare down the scope, right? Because forfeiture is going to take out things like crime, maybe, or whatever, right? pare down the scope so that then when we approach grounds for recall, we can say, I mean, I think, as you said, Durwood, we've made really good progress in saying, I think personally pointing out that these are the reasons you can't be recalled.
Really good.
Is the right way, the right approach, rather than trying to make an exhaustive list and think about all the things that will transpire in the future that aren't crimes right now. And then I think I'll also call out, just because I've kind of heard it being touched on, is during the last recall, Bill Ward made a, I think, very valid point, in that the select board was not allowed to rule on or discuss the recall at length because the charter didn't allow them to, but also the spirit was that because they're the subjects, they could be the subjects of the recall, the elected official, they should not be involved in that process because they're obviously biased. And so I get really hesitant when I hear discussions about forming a committee that's made up of a select board, just spitballing. But I get really hesitant about creating any sort of policing force around this. It should be, it should be crystal clear from the language that allows anyone to go and say, yep, I can determine this or I can't determine this. It doesn't have to be an investigative committee or anything like that, in my opinion. Stephen?
And I totally
Ted,
agree with
I've got
that,
you.
actually. Even as I was articulating it, I don't see how it would possibly be implementable. It wouldn't be, because you'd have all sorts of standard of review issues, and I think Durwood and Chris are absolutely right that there's no way to have a committee approach to determine initially whether something passes muster or not. As you said, it's the electorate that is going to make that decision.
I've got Ted, then Brenda.
Yes, thank you. I was really struck in listening to what you were saying, Stephen, and talking about what is not grounds for recall. That's very similar, all of us who've been on not-for-profit boards, the D&O policy, and that if you're properly instituting your duties as a board member, you're okay, basically. And so the insurance industry has a great deal of experience with D&O policies, and it seems to me the principle is applying here the same way, rather than try to say, well, if the board member, blah, 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 it can't be done as we've found. And so I strongly support that. I also want to sort of where I was at before, we have to step back at this before we jump into detailed language, and that I have some general comment on that. One, that we do recognize that we're struggling with it. This is a political, not a legal process or recall, and so how do you legislate that? And in that regard, what Chris wrote, we were discussing the document you gave, but you had an email cover for that, which I read tonight too. The email that you wrote to everybody, which laid out some general principles, and somehow this doesn't want me to look at it. There it goes. And that I think that we should look at that, because that steps back and look at some general principles. I worry about diving into detail before we've sort of looked at the environment. The other one I had raised last time, I was a little bit worried that we dig in and we have a very detailed recall, and the school board is under that until the school board gets a state rule, in which case then maybe we would then have to rewrite it and say this recall does not apply to school board, if I understand that, and that then if there's a recall, then the other town. So we have a system where there's 3 town recalls, and then there's a school board recall, and that the town administers the election, but maybe what Gail told me tonight, they might have a system where the school board would manage if it was a school board member. Okay, so there's a town, this gets a little bit complicated, and make sure that we understand that we have various entities here, and so the school board is over here. They may have a recall coming up. May not. But it's a election decided by the town according to our criterion in the absence of specifics relating to the school board. So I just want to make sure that we don't proceed too fast without keeping in mind what might be happening with the school board. Finally, I really like the idea of a general statement of principles in the front. It's kind of what you wrote for CO2. I'm not a lawyer, but that's a very standard practice in any organization. Here's our mission statement. Here's our general statement. This is what guides us. And that very often that is sufficient when there's disputes for adjudicating disputes. Just that general statement. And that, and to me, that is everything. And I guess that's the 702 we're going to discuss as
Well,
a general.
701, I think, if you're talking about the recall principle.
Yeah, the recall. So the
That's
general statement of
701.
principles, I think we ought to strongly look at that.
Yep.
Yeah. So that's my.
Janice, I saw your hand up. Do you have a response for Ted? Or, yep.
Ted, you were asking about the legislation, and there are actually those 3 pieces of legislation out there regarding recalls. And they all had their public hearing this past week. There is a work session of all 3 of those next Thursday at 1 p.m. Nobody can comment, but you can listen to it online. But all the language in all 3 of those does specifically say that unless the municipality says differently, here is our law. So each bill, we don't know what'll pass, and the language could get changed, but right now, all of them specifically let the municipality make its own laws regarding recalls. So just so we keep that in mind as whatever we come up with. And we'll have to see what happens with those bills ultimately. Because Chris Babbage, I mean, you're our expert here on the legislature, but I guess lots of times the language gets changed, and sometimes the legislators aren't always aware of those changes, and sometimes they vote based on the original language. Because I know you guys, they're slammed. This is the biggest year they've ever had for bills in the state legislature. So they're all going crazy. Sometimes there's a little miscommunication of, which version they're voting on. So we don't know what's going to happen yet.
Chris, did you want to tag on to Ted, or
Yes.
I've got Brenda on deck?
Yes.
Okay.
Well, I just wanted to explain,
Yeah.
to piggyback on what Janice just said. I mean, we have very dedicated people in Augusta. And the legislators who are citizen legislators really rely on the committee attorneys for a great deal of wisdom. But, and then it goes to the executive branch departments where the committees get all of their information. But I do remember having a question about comprehensive plan, actually. And the fellow says, I asked a question, he said, no, that's not the law. And I had to respond and say, yes, it is, I wrote it 5 years ago. And he looked it up and he said, I did not know that. I mean, and he was an enforcer, you know what I mean? So good intended, but it's very complex, and, and he was out straight. His department was down from, 10 to 3, I think, and, you understand. My point is, though, regarding, I appreciate the references, Ted, of some of the stuff that you appreciated, but I just want to say to the public, like today, I shared some questions that I had brought up at the last meeting. Somebody had asked for, and actually some of that is regurgitated, I guess, here in 702. And then I also wrote to the committee online and said, this is what I'm going to propose tonight. None of that constitutes a discussion online of what we're going to do, what we're going to change, and all of that. So by bringing up the email, I'm careful not to make any negotiations during our email communication, because it needs to have the light of day. And so all I am doing is giving you a heads up that this is what I'm going to bring to the meeting and discuss, if possible.
Good point, Chris. Brenda, and then Susan.
I'm going to respond to Chris Babbage first, because when you write 4 pages to me and send it to me, I don't read it. I just plain don't read it, because I really feel that the discussion needs to happen here. And I want to work with the document that we are working on, and when you have points, you bring them in. But I don't want to mess up 2 documents along with my own thoughts and somebody else's. It's too much.
Well,
And I just,
I hear you, Brenda.
Okay.
But I need you to understand, in my opinion, my document deserves equal weight with Janice's document. And the courtesy that I'm doing is making sure that I'm not merely passing something out at the meeting, but as soon as I'm able, I just make sure you have a copy of it.
I differ with that. Janice and Stephen have been charged with writing their document. And I think they've done an incredible job with a very difficult task. And I appreciate your comments and Ted's comments and Durwood's and everybody else's to be made here. And I just don't read it because it clutters my mind, and it really, it just messes me up. But that's a different thing. Let me go back to 702. I love the statement about what does not constitute grounds. But I really think we have to consider how we document the accusations in a petition, a recall petition. 3 people's lives were, I don't know how to put this gently, really disrupted by lies. And there was no way to check those lies. Had we asked for instance, Tim's mismanagement of funds and voting for certain things, we could have asked for minutes for a meeting if we'd had this provision. We could have asked for minutes of a meeting that documented that he did that. That's not difficult. It means that the person who is submitting the petition has the responsibility to support the accusations being made. And I think that's a very important kind of thing. It doesn't go to a committee to judge that. You know, if I'm going to accuse Susan of mismanaging funds, I have to have some documentation. And it's going to come from invoices that she shouldn't have signed or things like that. There is some kind of documentation that I think should accompany, because I just hated to see Art LeBlanc, who he was devastated. Mm-hmm. And I think we have to consider that, the impact that it has. We don't have to say what you have to provide, you just have to document what you say. So that's my input.
And I did notice, just to call out, Janice had put in new language in 703 that I think tries to get there, and she calls out for, review from Natalie and everything, but I think we will get there. I think we will too. Susan.
I wanted to ask the chair, it's 25 after 8. Did you want to move along and discuss any other sections, or do you want to close out here?
I am willing to review action items and approve meeting minutes from last week, and then I would entertain motions. So new action items, I'm going to give everyone the action item that next time. Right now, what I'm envisioning the order of operations to be is, first up, we'll review the language for forfeiture of office. Then, to Ted and Chris's point, we'll do a review on section 701, which is kind of the principal intro statement, because I think that can go quickly. And then we can unpack 702, having laid kind of the groundwork with talking about forfeiture of office, to hopefully kind of narrow our scope in thinking about 702. And if we're able to get through that, I think that will be a great success. Susan?
And we do need to move along. I had comments on 3 and 4.
Yep.
So just to make sure that at some point we
Stretch goals.
get,
So if we get through 702 next week and we find ourselves with oodles of time and not wanting to cut out early for one night, I will happily entertain moving on to 03, 04, and so on. Janice?
Do you want to have any other folks in Ted? You know, Steve and I are kind of locked in on this part. Did you want to have anybody else start any of the other parts of the charter? I mean, now that we heard a little bit about form of government tonight.
So yeah, here's my thinking on that is I would really like us to unpack and just have a discussion about form of government, and I'd like to advertise that as like a meeting through the town newsletter or something like that, because I know Heather had mentioned to me a while back, a lot of the majority of the rest of the charter really revolves around town government other than the administrative sections, and I don't think we're going to get much juice out of the squeeze of the administrative sections, if you will, right? So I would say that what I would really like to do is get through the recall article as a group, get it close. I don't say we have to be final and done, and then have a big Wednesday night meeting where we launch into the introduction of form of government, and we advertise it, we get the word out, encourage public comment in that section because I know it's a hot topic, and then from there we can launch into actual subsequent meetings about town of government. That's at least where my head's at right now. But I would like to get recall, near final draft status, or at least where we're circulating things with no more substantive, I'll say. Like, if we can get it to a point where we don't have many substantive changes left, and it's tweaking wording and stuff like that, that would be a point where I would be happy to chalk up the subsequent meeting. And I think we'll know when we're getting close to that and can at least get notice out to the public, hopefully 2 or 3 meetings in advance and say, hey, this is the date we're setting in the future to start talking about form of government. Please show up. This is going to be our form of government kickoff session. Go
Can I
for it.
make one
Yep.
quick?
Yep.
Picking up on Nathan's contributions tonight, if we could have fact sheets for the public on the forms of government,
Yep.
that'd be a great asset, because then they can be compared
Yep.
rather than just a mash of oral presentations.
And I think the MMA already provides us something that's pretty darn close to that. All right. Last meeting's agenda.
Chris, will Joel be joining us at some point?
I hope so. I hope Joel hasn't sailed off into the sunset. I will ping him again and email
Yeah,
him and
'cause
get his
I've got-
bounce back. I'll ping Heather
I have a
too.
whole bunch of questions for that. so-
Yeah. He said he'd be happy to. He said that last time he had a last minute conflict come up and he would join us at our discretion in the future. So, I trust Joel to honor that. All right. Motion to approve the meeting minutes of the regular meeting of April 12th, 2023. Second, Ted Trainer. Open for discussion. Any comments, questions, concern? Seeing none, all those in favor of approving April 12th, 2023 minutes? All those opposed? Passes 8-0, 1 absent. Dick Smith being absent. And do I have a motion?
To adjourn.
Yep. Second, all those in favor to adjourn?
Aye.
Aye. The motion was made by Brenda, I seconded, and then it was 801. No, so, thank you, Janice, for being our note taker. Meeting adjourned.
I supported the fact that Tim didn't come, but I just wanted to make the point that there was that opportunity.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. The other thing I wanted to say to you